on its nest in Scotland. One of the world's most magnificent bird, a bird which disappeared as a breeding species from the UK, but was nurtured back through huge conservation effort. An osprey. What a bird to start this episode of Springwatch. Hello and welcome to Springwatch 2020, a Springwatch with a difference, very obviously. We've had to change things around. It's all a bit of a cottage industry, to be quite honest with you, due to the fact that we're strictly adhering to the government's guidelines under this lockdown. But we've kept the flavour there, the flavour of showing you the very best of British wildlife. And we want to celebrate that wildlife, so tonight we're celebrating the restoration and repair of species and their habitats. Now, sometimes in order to effect that, you need big, grandiose projects. You need big bucks sometimes. Lots of people working very hard for years and years and years. But sometimes it's just down to me and you to do our own little bit. And our own little bit can actually make a difference, as it has for Isla, aged 7. Look at this. This is her first conservation project. She's putting a pond in her back garden. It might be a small pond, but it could make a big difference to the wildlife in that garden. It certainly made a big difference to Isla, and perhaps that's even more important, because knowing that you've done something to make this world a better place can put a smile on your face. And I reckon that her washing up bowl next year could have frogs and newts and toads breeding in it, maybe dragonflies and damselflies this year, and that will undoubtedly put a smile on Isla's face. Our birds, those that we've been watching in our nest, have been really busy. This is the peak of the season when they're trying to rear their young. They're out and about getting as much food as possible and trying to get it into those baby birds' beaks. If only we could muster the collective energy of all of those parent birds at this time of year, back and forth to those nests, I'm sure we could make a big difference. But then some people have. Here's a project which is one of those bigger projects that's taken a long time to work. You see, the great bustard was a breeding species in the UK up until the 1840s. They hung on until the bitter end, Salisbury Plain. They were harvested for food, people ate their eggs, agricultural changes made life difficult for them, and they disappeared. Cue the Great Bustard Group, a group of people who took eggs from nests destroyed in Russia and brought them over to the UK and released them onto Salisbury Plain. And look, the bustards are back. Yes, Dave Waters is the force behind the Great Bustard Group. And I met him some time ago, and I can tell you he put sterling work and energy into getting these birds back. And when we spoke to him in 2016, he said that he wanted to, within 4 or 5 years, see 100 of these birds in the wild and a self-sustaining population. Well, we've spoken recently to Dave, and guess what? They've done it. There's about 100 birds out there, and that population has been judged to be self-sustaining. And this means that it's the first successful reintroduction of any bustard species anywhere in the world. Now, a lot of people were involved, but when I met Dave all of those years ago in his bungalow, the other side of Salisbury, he put his life on the line for this project, quite literally. So Dave Waters, we salute you for a great piece of practical, proactive conservation. You put the bustard back in Britain. And we love that, Yolo, don't we?
We certainly do, Chris. That is brilliant news. And actually, you're there celebrating Britain's heaviest bird. And I'm going to join in. I'm going to celebrate the success or Britain's tallest bird, the common crane. Very elegant bird. It stands at 1.2 metres tall. They last bred in the UK in 1542, but then a small group turned up in Norfolk in 1979. They bred 3 years later in 1982, and since then there's been intensive management work and habitat recreation, and of course there's been the Great Crane Project in the southwest of England too, where 93 cranes were hand-reared and then released on the Somerset levels. Since then, numbers have expanded through England. They first bred in Scotland in 2012, in Wales on the Gwent levels in 2016, and now we have around 200 common cranes here in the UK, more than we've had for about 500 years. Isn't it brilliant when nature bounces back? And Gillian, you've got good news as well.
Yes, I do. I'm all about spreading that positivity. Yeah, so we've got a good news story, something maybe a bit more familiar to all of you. We were sent this photo in by Charlie Ward. She was gazing out of her kitchen window and saw this fledgling flailing around in her pond. So she rushed out, rescued it, and let it dry off on her lawn. And she kept a close eye on it. And this is what she saw next. The parent, the male, returned very, very quickly and resumed parenting duties, feeding that chick right there on the lawn, presumably to boost its reserves so it could keep going. So that was just lovely to see. And Charlie got in touch with us to say that that fledgling is still around, still hanging around by the pond, but the parent is staying close by. So it looks like they've learnt their lesson. And that is the kind of good news story that Michaela Strachan would like. But sadly, she's not with us. She is in South Africa, still in lockdown. But we are joined by the lovely Gordon Buchanan at Lake Menteith in Scotland.
Thank you, Gillian. Slightly hushed tones tonight because I have switched location. 200 metres, little bit over from where I'm standing, is an osprey nest. And that osprey nest has chicks. Look very carefully and you'll see that tiny, tiny little chick. That is amazing, just about a week old. I'm going to be back with you later in the programme with more ospreys, but for now, down to Chris.
What about that? That's not a bad start, is it? Great bustards, cranes and ospreys, and more ospreys to come. Good stuff. Now, a couple of weeks ago, in one of the bushes just beyond the hedgerow behind me here, I found a goldfinch's nest, and I had a quick peep, and then I left it alone to its own devices. I think they fledged successfully. But I couldn't stand there for 24 hours a day looking at that nest from that far away and figuring out everything that goes on there. I can't do that as a naturalist, but we can do that as Springwatch, because using our technology, we've got micro little cameras that we can rig on nests, as we have done, in the Mendips and watch them 24/7. And we get to learn a lot more about them a lot more quickly. One nest that we've been watching very intently are the blue tits. They have a good backstory. Here's the blue tits live now, and you can see there are 2 youngsters in that nest. There were 3 yesterday, so what's been going on? Well, let's go back to the beginning. This was a nest that was being tended by just one parent, the female. Now, typically when blue tits fail, the reason they fail, 86% of the time, is because one of the parents disappears, and then they're in a real trouble. But that same study showed that 71% of those nests that were being tended by one parent managed to fledge at least one of those youngsters. So there was still hope for this little one at the bottom who is struggling at the moment. The others are clambering up the side. As you can see, they're much bigger and stronger. She increases her feeding rate to try and replicate the feeding rate that would exist for these young if the male were there too. The problem is she's collecting lower quality food that sort of can bulk them up but doesn't have the nutrition. And unfortunately, as they grew stronger, the little one at the bottom wasn't able to reach up to that nest hole and wasn't getting as much food. And this afternoon, if you were watching live, you'll see that eventually this young chick perished. Now, that might be a sad end for that chick, but it's actually good news for the other 2. I mentioned that she was bringing in lower quality food. Well, now at least they're going to get more of it, and they're just a short while off fledging. So I'm still betting that in the next couple of days she will do what the 71% do and get one of those chicks at least out of that nest. And that will be her contribution to blue tit conservation this year. Top stuff. Another nest that we've been watching are the coots. I've been watching these through the last couple of days. Plenty of antics at the coots. Here we are. Here is the pond where they're living. Kingfishers there on that pond. And here are some of the youngsters. There were 8 eggs, 6 have hatched. The adults have been out collecting food for them, collecting aquatic larvae and all sorts of things. Here's the female incubating the remainder of the clutch and brooding some of those chicks. And you can see the trees wobbling around. A grey squirrel came to have a look. And you'll know that these animals will predate the eggs and young of birds whilst they're in the nest. Not typically coots, I think things that are typically up deciduous trees. But look, the male coot has no truck with that squirrel. It's straight in there, chasing that non-native rodent away. And the squirrel gets chased off, leaving the female to look after those youngsters. Now we can go live to the coots now. This is not that nest, as you can see. This is out in the middle of the pond. This is a brooding platform that the male has made, and he's out there brooding those youngsters which have hatched already. The female should be back on the nest, incubating the remaining eggs and maybe brooding some of the other youngsters. And if we take a look at the nest now, unfortunately that's not the case. It appears that she's abandoned the last egg, despite the fact that it appears to be hatching, and that when she last returned, bringing some of the young with her earlier in the day, one of them died while she was brooding it. Now, we have no idea why, and it's unlikely, I'm afraid, that she's now going to come back and continue to incubate that egg, which means that they've got 6 out of 8. And 6 out of 8 isn't bad, actually, for coots. So we'll be continuing to watch those, and you can 24/7 by looking at those cameras on the BBC iPlayer and the BBC Springwatch website. Top stuff. Now, when it comes to looking after animals, sometimes it's a big, grandiose conservation project, reintroducing species. But other people want to look after the things that we've got here and that are in real trouble, and they want to do that themselves. And to do so requires an enormous amount of dedication, effort and energy. And one lady that's been mustering that for a long time is Beryl Casey, and she's been looking after hedgehogs down in Porter's Head. Now, she won't mind me saying, and I say it politely, that Beryl is getting on a bit, and she wants her good work to continue. So she's taken on a young apprentice. And this film was made before lockdown. That's why they're close together in the film.
I'm known as the hedgehog lady, and I found that sort of quite flattering, really.
Beryl has transformed her home in Portishead into a hedgehog hospital.
Hedgehogs I've always had a soft spot for anyway, so I set up my own hedgehog rescue. Knowing nothing, of course. Nothing prepares you for what you're actually going to see and do. I think if you did, I don't think you'd do it if you had any sense. They do 2 things better than any other animal I know, and that's eat and poo.
Hedgehogs are the UK's only spiny mammal, but their numbers have been in drastic decline. In the 1950s, it was estimated that there were more than 36 million living on our isles. But now this number is believed to be below 1 million.
It makes me want to weep, losing the hedgehogs at the vast quantity that we are and at the speed we are. Generally, it's known that we've lost 1/3 of our hedgehog population in the last 5-6 years, which is pretty catastrophic. An awful lot of that is damage that we as humans are doing. So their habitat area is getting smaller and smaller because there's too many cars, too many buildings, that instead of weeping, I try and do something about it. But it still upsets me all the same.
Aware that she's getting older, Beryl has been searching for someone to continue her vital work when she no longer can.
So what I would like to do is get a whole load of carers in different areas around that can learn what I do from me and start up their own rescue centres so that when I do shuffle off this mortal coil, then the knowledge will still continue.
By reaching out to the local community, Beryl found 13-year-old Thea, who she's mentored for the last 6 months.
Hi, Sally. Come on in.
All of the 30 patients here need expert care and attention.
Hello, Missy.
Thea has had to learn quickly.
Like medication-wise, what helps, what to give them if they ever need help. Seeing their faces when they're getting better is just amazing. And learning how to do it is great as well. Doesn't look like there's anything.
No parasites, just gritty, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very gritty.
So if you were looking for capillaria, what would you actually look for?
Like, it looks a bit like grains of rice. But there's nothing like that. No, it doesn't look like there's anything.
OK.
Before, I wouldn't even have the confidence to, like, just pick up a hedgehog or look at its skin, but now it's just part of an everyday thing. I thought they'd be more prickly, but no, they're actually, like, quite soft, and they've got, like, soft bellies underneath them. It's quite cute.
Today, Thea will be releasing hedgehogs for the very first time.
This is the one we're going to release today. So we want to check that she's all perfectly happy and healthy. So if you'd like to take her out, and if you could just check her over and make sure she's OK, and we'll weigh her.
A moment that she's been working towards.
She looks all right, her face. She's got
She can curl up tight, can't she? So that's OK.
Yeah.
And we'll keep her records up to date for the last 7:15. So her weight stayed pretty stable, so she's fine. Do you want to put her back in a box, and we'll take her in that box.
With this hedgehog being given a clean bill of health, they can transport it to the release site.
Releasing is a very bittersweet experience because after nursing them back to health, you're as chuffed as all get out because they're fine. But then you wonder and worry, are they going to be OK? Now, this is the first release that you will be doing, but my theory is always the same, and the hog always goes back, when possible, there are exceptions, to where it came from in the first place. All right?
Today, Beryl and Thea will be releasing the hedgehog in the back garden of one of Beryl's former apprentices, Abby.
Normally just have like put them down here so they're sheltered anywhere.
Yeah.
Once in position, the hedgehog is left a bowl of water and some food to keep it going through its first couple of days.
I really like it knowing that they're back where they sort of belong. They know, well, they're back in the wild where they should be.
This will hopefully be the end of this hedgehog's care by this pair. But the big question is, does Thea make the grade?
Everything about Thea actually impresses me. Her attitude, her dedication, her love of animals, which is absolutely oozes out of her. And I think it's an honour to have her working with us as well.
God, I see you start laughing and then I can't stop.
With Thea on board, the future looks that little bit brighter for the hedgehog population of Portishead.
I love that film. I love that film. Young and old united by a passion to protect wildlife. Now that, as I said, was made before lockdown. We spoke to Beryl today to see how she's getting on. She's doing great, and of course looking forward to the lockdown ending so that Thea can get back there and start helping out with those hogs as well. Now, last summer, we ran a great big citizen science project called Garden Watch. 200,000 missions were completed. Each mission was a survey of people's gardens. We wanted to get a better idea of what sort of resources our gardens could offer wildlife. The BTO have crunched all the data, and when it comes to hedgehogs in particular, we see that more people along the east coast of England had hedgehogs in their garden than anywhere else. So that was Yorkshire, Lincolnshire and Norfolk. So why are hedgehogs turning up in those gardens and perhaps doing better there than they are out in the wider countryside? After all, we are talking about an animal that's endured a 50% decline since the year 2000 in rural areas. Well, I think those rural areas have lost lots of habitat. Hedgerows continue to come out. Fields are getting bigger. Pesticides are being used. And of course, pesticides use is going to impact on one thing that's essential to the hedgehog. It's food. These are insectivorous animals. They'll also take arachnids and mollusks too, but their favourites are things like beetles and earthworms, any of those sorts of things. If they really push, they'll go for slugs and snails. And of course, in urban areas, they've struggled too, where people are too tidy in their gardens. And look at this one, squeezing to get underneath a fence because the fence is too close to the ground. But there's a solution there too. And Sam Wilkinson has made a difference for the hogs in his garden. He's part of something called Hedgehog Street. He's made a hole in the bottom of his fence, and look, you can see the happy hogs hopping through the hole. Fantastic stuff. And you know what they say, Sam? If you build it, he will come. Hog of dreams. Hog of dreams. I wish I had hedgehogs. Look, we've got the habitat here, still got hedgerows, it's all overgrown. I've been here for 12 years. I've never seen a single hedgehog. On any of my trip cameras, I've never found any poo. They're not here. It's a sad thing, Yolo. What about you? I mean, have you got hogs in your garden?
Yeah, I have actually, Chris. I'm very lucky. I saw a lot of them last year, not so much this year, maybe because of the dry weather. But now we've had a little bit of rain, I will be looking out for them again. And actually, hedgehogs, they're not the only animals to be tracked here in the UK. We're also tracking white-tailed eagles. So what's the story there? Well, to answer that, we have to go back several centuries to a time when white-tailed eagles were widespread and common in Britain. Because of persecution, they began to disappear, and the last pair bred in the south of England on the Isle of Wight in 1780. So in spring last year, a reintroduction programme was started. The first step was to go up to Scotland to collect some carefully selected chicks, 6 in all. That was in June. They were brought down to some release pens at a secret location on the Isle of Wight. They were fed, they were health checked constantly, and eventually they were released. And the long-term aim is to release a maximum of 60 birds. And this really is a long-term project, especially when you consider that white-tailed eagles don't breed until they're 5 or 6 years old. So we won't know whether it's been successful or not for decades yet. The project is driven by Forestry England and the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation. And one of the things they did was attach transmitters onto the young birds. Now, so far we know one bird has died. Unfortunately, one is missing. But where are the others? Well, let's go up and have a look here. They've travelled widely throughout England, taking in the southwest, the southeast and the north. One even went over London here. We know it was seen by several people there. 2 presently are up in the north of England, but 2 are back down in the Isle of Wight. And this is what young eagles do. For the first year or 2 of life, they travel widely before usually returning to their natal area to breed. And that is the hope, that they will return down here. And earlier you saw a photograph there taken by a good friend of mine, Tim Melling, up in Yorkshire of an eagle with a tracking device on its back. Now, one of the big questions, of course, is how such a large bird can travel vast areas in a relatively short time. Well, the secret to a bird's flying capability is the length and the width of its wing. And in the bird world, there are 4 basic groups. Let me show you here. These are outlines, not to scale, of course. First group are the birds of prey, fairly large winged birds. Secondly, you have the passerines, your garden birds, the birds you see on your bird feeders. Also, you have your house martins, your swallows and swift, narrow wings, fast flight. And finally, you have some of the seabirds with these fairly long wings there. So let's start with a bird we're concentrating on, the white-tailed eagle. And really, it's no wonder that this bird is called the flying barn door. It really is enormous. They have wide wings and a low wing load, which means that the body is light in comparison to the size of the wing, which gives them lift. Compared to some of the large seabirds, the wings are fairly short, which means that takeoff is easier and they are more manoeuvrable. And at the end of the wings, you saw those long primaries. Those reduce drag, making it easier for the birds to fly and glide through the air. The second group, the passerines, common garden birds, let's have a look at the blue-tit. These are the birds we see in our gardens, and these all have elliptical shaped wings. And what we have to remember, of course, is that originally these were woodland birds, and those wings are adaptations for them to be able to fly between the trees, between bushes. They can almost literally turn on a penny. Important when you're looking for food, even more important when you're trying to dodge and escape from a bird like a sparrowhawk. The third group are birds like the swifts. Swifts, of course, are summer visitors here to us. They have long wings, thin, tapered wings, a high wing load, fairly heavy body in relation to the size of the bird, and that means that they have to work extremely hard. They have to flap quickly, but that also means a fast flight, maximum speed of 111 kilometers per hour, 69 miles an hour. That's not bad for a small bird. And remember that swifts spend almost all of their lives on the wing. They land only to nest. They breed on the wing, they feed on the wing, they even sleep on the wing. And the final group, a group of seabirds, fairly long-winged, like our own gannet. These nest in large colonies around the UK coast. Long wings in comparison to the size of the body. And this is the best shape to take advantage of variations in wind speed out over the open sea. And the birds that take this to the extreme are birds like the albatross. And of course, the gannet can also, like a dart, fold its wings behind its back when it wants to plunge into the sea after fish like mackerel, garfish, whatever it is. So to summarise really, the white-tailed eagle has got the perfect design for a large bird that lives either near the coast or on land. And I have to say that personally, this is a bird that I would love to see back all across the south of England, back where it should be. And one of my ambitions, one of my aims is that I live long enough to see white-tailed eagles nesting in Wales once more. Wouldn't that be brilliant? And Gillian, I can just see you now walking along the Cornish coast in the bright sunshine, looking up, and there's a white-tailed eagle looking down at you.
Iolo, I would love that. Honestly, I think I'd have to pinch myself and think I was dreaming if I saw a white-tailed eagle down here. It'd be an amazing sight. Now, you know what? I want to share a little triumph. It's actually quite a big triumph with you. And this is actually courtesy of Cambridgeshire. In 2016, the Cambridge Natural History Society launched an urban garden survey. And Paul Rule, amateur naturalist, a nature lover if you like, decided that he would take part in this survey and do, I was going to say a little bit, it's a mega bio blitz of his garden. So he started in 2016 and carried on as it continued right to now, right through lockdown. And he has recorded an amazing 486 different species of animals in his garden. Of course, most of those will be invertebrates, but 272 of those are moths like this one here. This is the yellow barred moth, and it's an absolute beauty of a moth. This is about 2.5 centimeters. It's quite common though, but he also saw this, a much rarer species. Now this here is Aceraca clavicornis, and it doesn't even have a common name, it's that scarce. It's a type of plant hopper, and there are very few records of this outside of London. So really, really special to see this in his garden. And really, you've got to say, Paul's doing something right to attract that amount of diversity into his garden. Well, I tell you, Cornwall has diversity too, and that is actually courtesy in part to the mild weather, although I've got to say I'm not feeling that right now. But because of the mild weather, the shorter winters, it provides an opportunity, microclimates, for some really surprising species to thrive. And I've got one right here. And you can see that. That looks exotic because it is. That is a stick insect, an unarmed stick insect, a great name for a lovely little thing. Now, these are actually native to New Zealand, but they were introduced here through the soil of imported plants. Now, there are about 5 different species of stick insects in the UK, most of them found in the southwest, in Devon and Cornwall and even Isles of Scilly. And they're thought to have arrived here over a century ago. And they were not really noticed, mainly because they're camouflage. As you can see, they're very difficult to spot. But the first records were in a garden centre not far from where I am, in Truro, and that was recorded in 1920. So they've done really well. They've established themselves as a breeding population, and as such, they're naturalised because they don't really affect the resident wildlife. There are some species, however, that when introduced and they start to impact negatively the resident wildlife here, then the terminology changes from naturalised to invasive species. And that's when they start to cause difficulties for the native species here. So things like our ladybirds have a lot of challenges. Something like this one here, the 7-spot ladybird. Now this, along with other species, are being challenged by an introduced species, the harlequin ladybird. Now these were first recorded in 2004 and they have spread really quickly. They have voracious appetites and they also have multiple broods each season. So it means they can easily outcompete the native ladybird species. So that's the difference between naturalized and invasive species. So what about this guy? I bet you almost forgot about him. Now, first of all, what I can tell you about this one is he is actually a she. How do I know that? Well, let's take a closer look here. And now, let's see if you can, it's not going to be, there we go. Bit of a tricky one, but you get a really good look. So we know these are females because all the individuals in the wild are females, but they're able to breed even though they're not mating or fertilized. And that means that they don't need to have males in the population. They can continue producing viable eggs that aren't fertilized. And that's a pretty neat trick when good males are hard to find. So the unarmed stick insect females may have given up looking for males, but in October 2016, entomologist David Fenwick made an amazing discovery because what he found was a very unusual looking specimen. Take a look at this. So this one was a lot darker than the usual specimens I would find, and he decided to take a closer look and consult other entomologists. And what they found was, in fact, that this particular individual right here was a male unarmed stick insect. In fact, the very, very first male to ever be discovered, to be recorded. And it's thought that this is a product of a really rare mutation. So that male may be the only male of his species. Now, Chris, I don't know what you think, but that may well be a very lonely male or maybe a very lucky male, depending on how you look at it.
I think he's a lucky mutant male. You're always lucky to be a lucky mutant male. Now look, I'm going to show you a bit of agricultural architectural heritage here. I'm very lucky to have this old grain barn in my yard standing on what we call staddle stones. And the idea of the staddle stone is they stand up on this mushroom here. It lets air underneath to keep the grain nice and dry. But the overhang here is designed to keep rodents out, rats and mice, which in the 17th and 18th centuries would eat the grain inside. Well, the staddle stones might have worked in the 17th and 18th centuries, but they're not working in the 21st, because as my trip camera shows from last night's recording, there's a mouse fest going on inside this barn. And it is a mouse fest, because there's 2 species of mice in here. Now, the one that we would expect to see, because they're relatively common, are wood mice. But I set this little Longworth trap last night. This is a humane trap which captures the animals live, and they live perfectly okay in this little chamber at the back here. And I caught something pretty special, something I haven't seen for a long time. And I put it here in this jar. It's a yellow-necked mouse. It's about double the size of a typical wood mouse. And what you can't see is that it's got a collar of yellowy brown between its forelegs, which meets up, indicating it's definitely yellow-necked mouse. And also, you might be able to see a much thicker tail there at the base. Now, these animals are typically found pretty much in the south of England. They like mature woodland and they feed on tree seeds. You don't get to see them very often. They're quite arboreal. And I have to say, when I first caught them way back in the 70s in someone's conservatory near Winchester, I was extracting them from the Longworths here by hand. And they're pretty ferocious, say no more. Got quite a few bites. Today I very delicately put it in there. And they live in extended families. So this one's going straight back in the barn as soon as we finish. Anyway, what about this? Look at my little patch here. Look at my little patch. I'm quite proud of this patch, and I'm proud of it because it's got plenty of this in it. Dock. You see, I'm putting this patch here for another species of mouse, a micro mouse, a mouse which weighs pretty much the same as a 2p piece, about 6 grams. Yes, the harvest mouse. It's the smallest rodent that we've got in Europe. We're not entirely sure how many there are in the UK. We think they've declined, but they're very difficult to census. And look here, they've got a prehensile tail. If you watch very carefully, you can see it's using the tail to wrap around the stalks of the grass as it's climbing. They build these beautiful little nests in the summer, and inside those they give birth to up to 3 litters of somewhere between 6 and 8 pups. Of course, they're granivorous animals. They're feeding principally on seeds. They will supplement that diet with insects as well. Fantastic stuff, beautiful. And look, I'm very lucky. I've got a harvest mouse nest here. It's about the size of a tennis ball. And if I rotate it in my fingers, you'll see that there's no obvious entrance hole. And that's because every time the harvest mouse comes back, it simply pushes its way through into the nest and then closes the door behind it, as it were. And these are a good sign, of course, if you can find them, that you've got harvest mice. They are quite tricky to find because when they make them, they're made out of green grass and they blend into the background really, really well. But we've got a good harvest mice story for you. You see, a PhD student, going back in 2004, decided that she was going to breed some harvest mice and reintroduce them to a nature reserve in Northumberland. Here she is. Here's a picture of Wendy Fail in 2004. There she is with a harvest mouse nest, look, and she was breeding these things. She bred 240 in the end, and she soft released them back into East Chevington Nature Reserve in Northumberland. And a short while after releasing them, they thought, well, I know, let's check to see if this works. So they ran some traps in the habitat where they were, and they found absolutely nothing. And Wendy thought that she'd lived up to her name. Fail. The whole thing had failed, which was a bit disappointing. Until last October, when some volunteers went out onto the reserve and they found a couple of those little nests, and the harvest mice must have been there all along. Wendy hadn't failed. Wendy had very definitely succeeded. What about that? And now I can tell you that that nature reserve and a couple of others have got lottery funding, and those volunteers will be out surveying to see how many harvest mice are there. And I'm very pleased to say that the lady that owns this area here has started her own rewilding project, and we've kicked off by allowing areas like this to grow with plenty of dock, which harvest mice like eating, and at some stage in the future we might even try our own reintroduction here. But from a tiny mouse to a terrible and ferocious predator that would gobble up harvest mice and even yellowneck mice given the chance. You see, Michaela Strachan isn't here this year, but she's chosen some of her favourite moments, and they include the one and only Stoat.
Now, one of our stars of this year's Springwatch, without a doubt, has to be our female stoat.
She's a super mum.
And we've seen it doing this quite a lot, moving its kits. That is a big kit that it's got in its mouth. It's nearly as big as the adult. But it's moving it from the safety of one rabbit hole to another.
What a diligent mother.
But look at this. This is rather lovely to watch. It's 3 of the kits that are obviously active now, and they've decided to walk themselves, but they're doing it rather slowly. It's actually surprising that they are going quite so slowly. The mum's hurrying them up a little bit. She knows that she's got to get them into the safety of those rabbit holes.
It's mustelids in motion, isn't it? But of course, they're out there living on the heathland because there's a bountiful source of prey. So here you can see the stoats tearing along with a small rabbit. It's probably caught that underground, and it's not going to represent much of a threat in terms of potentially injuring this stoat.
She's such a fantastic little hunter.
Now, the stoat has got another young rabbit. But this little rabbit has a very vigilant mother. And look at that. It chases the stoat. It's trying to protect its young. I mean, that rabbit is about twice the size of the stoat. It's a good chase. Once it gets it, look at the back legs, Chris. Kicking away, it flings that stoat in the air.
If it gets injured, then the stoat's had it next time round because it won't be as efficient when it comes to hunting. So it can't afford to get injured. No wonder it's running away from the rabbit.
I wonder how often the rabbits actually kill the stoats.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't happen on occasion, especially with female stoats, which, as I say, are quite considerably smaller than the males.
Something rather dramatic happened on Friday in a rather unexpected place. Now, we saw this rabbit, and then, look what happened. The stoat comes in. It's a bit gruesome, this. It happens very quickly. It's over very quickly. This all happened in our production village. You can see the size difference is incredible. That stoat probably weighs about 200 grams. The rabbit, about 1,000. So it's 5 times its weight.
Doesn't want to give up that rabbit, Michaela. That's a monstrous amount of food to have caught. So it's bound to try and hang on to it and get it to those kits.
It's got 8 kits to feed, though, hasn't it, Chris? It's got to provide a lot of food. And do you know, we did some calculations, and we decided that would be the equivalent of me dragging a red deer stag in my teeth 1 kilometre.
I've seen you do it.
Wasn't a pretty sight.
I've seen you do it. It was remarkable. It's a record-breaking attempt.
It's like that. Ooh.
For the last 2 weeks, we've had an extraordinary opportunity, not just to see a stoat, but to follow the life of a single female stoat. And yesterday, it was this. She was predating a green woodpecker's nest 7 metres up in a tree.
It's really interesting to see what she does here, because she positions that chick. She goes up, gets her bearings, works out how she's going to get that chick down the tree. She comes back, grabs it, and drags it up to the top so she can get it down to the bottom.
This is predation in action.
Now, she's taking it to her kits that are hidden away in that grassland somewhere.
Look at this. She's got a strategy now, Michaela. She's going to balance that chick there, and she's got it in the right position. She comes out, climbs back up again. And I never realised stoats were such good climbers. I've always thought of them as purely terrestrial animals. Never see one up a tree. It's amazing.
It's incredible to see this at all. Look at the muscles in her shoulders as she drags that chick. This is a hard-working mother. But look at the way she's going down the tree.
She's going down like a pine marten. Look at the back legs turned around. She's hanging on with those claws. And of course, a nest full of woodpeckers like this will keep those youngsters going all day.
The energy involved in all this, Chris, is incredible.
She's a super mum. She really is a super mum. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Honestly, it's amazing.
Truly amazing. Stotally amazing.
Lovely to see a stoat, and even lovelier to see Michaela. So, I am not at the side of a lovely lake. I'm at the side, in the middle of a fabulous field. And I'm sure you'll be very pleased to know that I'll be bringing you more action from these awesome ospreys. I just love these birds. They are delightful. They are distinctive, they are dynamic. You watch an osprey for 5 minutes and it's going to do something really exciting. I've been saying all week that they've fast become one of my favourite birds of prey. I think they actually are my favourite bird of prey now. This is an already very special part of Scotland, and these birds just make it that little bit more special. So I'm speaking in slightly hushed tones now, and I'll explain why. Come with me. So I'm disguised as a farmer. You see my camera here is disguised as a Christmas tree, and that is because off there on that old oak is an osprey nest, and that osprey nest has chicks. So if you had come to us maybe 5 minutes ago, you would have actually seen the chicks. I just love this. Tonight's programme is all about regeneration, and these birds are a perfect example of how people and nature can live side by side. And I particularly love it because of these ospreys, how they're tolerated, how they're accepted. They are essentially a predator. So, let's talk a little bit about this site. Kind of unusual for an osprey. Its view is not sort of a wild part of Scotland. It's seeing lots of sheep and cattle, a lot of activity with the farm. So yes, the interesting thing about this place, you tend to think of osprey selecting these wild locations, and this is very far from that. Interestingly, birds that fledge from nests like this are more likely to seek out nest sites like this when they come to breed. So those little chicks may well in the future be looking for a site like this rather than deep forest. So about 9 o'clock in the morning, I filmed this at the nest. So the male and the female, they're both 8 years old. The female is from Inverness, you can tell by her accent. And the male is a local lad. He was actually hatched out and fledged from a nest nearby. This was the first time that I'd actually seen the female leave the nest, and I was wondering what she was up to, where she was going. 53 seconds later, she came back with a fairly sizable stick. So she's been brooding, he's been fishing, but this home renovation is something that they do together. And I particularly loved this. I was watching this, and I thought this couple is so tight because he sees her struggling with that big stick, and he gives her a helping hand. See, in my house, there's a lot of DIY that gets done, but there's only one person that actually does it. You know, it's great. I was worried that they were actually going to clobber those tiny chicks with that stick. I was slightly nervous because last week I actually saw 2 chicks, and the other day only saw 1. But I can confirm there are still 2 chicks on this nest. So exactly a week ago, round about this time, I filmed this. Those chicks were, I would say, a day old, and the male came in with a big fish, and this is my very first glimpse of those chicks, and they were tiny. The proud father's looking on, and the female, she's tweezering off the tiniest bits of fish for those chicks. And over the last week, they have been piling on the wake. I think they've probably doubled in size. What is truly remarkable is those tiny chicks, in 3 months' time, will have fledged from this nest, all being well, and they will be flying 3,000 miles or so to West Africa. And they'll do that not holding the wing of their parents. They'll be doing that on their own. And this navigation is still not completely unknown, but it's really it's a bit of a mystery, because birds that migrate and have migrated before, they recognise geographic features. I recognise that lake or that headland. But for these chicks, they are genetically pre-programmed, without the assistance of their parents, other than their genes, to fly to the same kind of place that their parents fly to. What a remarkable bird, truly remarkable. This part of Scotland is really magical, but where I'm from on the west coast of Scotland, it is truly spectacular. This little film from Jim Manthorpe up in Loch Allen is really wonderful. Lots of sea lochs on the west coast, and lots of wild residents there. So just sit back, relax, take a deep breath, and enjoy some magic from Jim.
Absolutely beautiful. I do love these mindfulness moments, a minute and a half of nothing but the natural sights and sounds of spring. Jim Manthorpe, well done. And Loch Alling, what a beautiful place. If you've never been, once lockdown's over, do go. And talking of beautiful places, North Wales, especially after I had a phone call from a good friend of mine yesterday telling me that up there he'd seen this bird. It's an adult rose-coloured starling. Look at that. What an absolute stonker that is. What's it doing here? It should be in Asia or in the Far East, but this year there's been a big movement of birds right across Eastern Europe, into Western Europe, hundreds in France at the moment, and finally across the channel to us. Now, usually we get 3 or 4 adult birds in this country every year. So far this year, 25, maybe even 30, and they're as far west as the Isle of Skye. So it doesn't matter where you are, even during lockdown, keep your eyes open. You may well see a rose-coloured starling. Now I, of course, am in Montgomeryshire, here in beautiful mid-Wales, but 2 hours south of me in Monmouthshire, we have cameras on various nests. And last week, Chris teased us with one of these. It was the nest of a common sandpiper. So it's time to catch up with these now. This is the River Usk, beautiful river, and there is the common sandpiper. An African migrant arrives back on our shores in April. And this year, the pair has chosen to nest on the banks of the river underneath a fallen tree, in amongst the tall vegetation there. She's incubating 4 eggs, but then over the weekend, look, one of the eggs has hatched. There's a little chick. She takes that eggshell away immediately, but if you listen, the other adult is alarm calling. A sheep has wandered near the nest. You might think a sheep is no threat. Well, actually it is. It could trample those eggs and the chick. So one of the adults bravely puts itself between the nest and the sheep. Look at this. Look at that, opening its wings, making itself look bigger, alarm calling, even pecking the sheep on the end of its nose. Now that bird weighs 50 or 60 grams, the sheep upwards of 40 kilograms. That's like me trying to keep a blue whale away from my house. You think it's safe, it's past, but at that moment the chick decides to dash out. It makes a run for it out into the open. The sheep has gone past, but suddenly it turns around and starts to come back the other way. And how it missed that chick, I do not know. It came within a whisker of trampling that youngster. Soon as it's gone, soon as the danger's passed, the adult comes back to incubate the remaining eggs. And the other adult, well, his job is to fly down and start shepherding that chick back to the nest. Look, even a little bit of a peck on the backside, I think, there as well. And you know what? I've got to be honest, I do not blame it. It did go back under and got brooded by the bird there, by the incubating bird. And soon afterwards, I'm pleased to say, second egg hatched. Here it is, carrying the eggshell away. Then the third egg, and finally also the 4th egg. So all 4 chicks have hatched. How about that? That chick has survived its first encounter with a dangerous Welsh sheep. Chris, what do you think of that?
Oh, it's absolutely superb, isn't it? Those little birds put on those remarkable distraction displays, or in this case, a aggressive display to get rid of a potential danger like that. Fantastic, fantastic stuff. We are coming pretty much towards the end of our programme today, but there's a few things we'd like to show you before we go. What about this one? This beautiful photograph of a goldfinch taken by Mike Woolley, particularly pertinent as we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the BTO's Garden Birdwatch. And during the course of those 25 years, we know that the population of goldfinches has increased 2.5 times, and particularly in our gardens, and I think that's because we're putting out a greater variety of food there. And also, when goldfinches are moving around, they move around in flocks and they kind of scout out new locations. So if a couple of goldfinches find one, all the rest will pile in, and they're piling into my garden at the moment and taking all of that. We've also had this clip sent to us of a heron defending fish, I think, from a gull. This was sent to us by James Wilson. I think what's happened here is the heron has probably caught a fish and dropped it on the ground. The gull fancies its chances at a free lunch and is swooping down trying to get it, and the heron is thinking, no, I've done all of the hard work, it's mine. And then lastly, we were talking about hedgehogs earlier. What about this one? Sophie Cooper has filmed a hedgehog in her garden in daylight, and what a feast she's laid on for the hedgehogs. Perhaps that's one of the reasons why they're not declining as rapidly in our gardens as they are in the rural landscape. Nice to see a bowl of water there for the hedgehog too. Well, sadly, that is time for today. We've given you a lot, I think. What have we had? We've had the mouse that was missing and came back. That was pretty good. White-tailed eagles in the south of England, great bustards, cranes, and those ospreys up in Scotland. How can we live up to that tomorrow? Well, I'm going to live up to it by telling you what's wonderful about wasps. Yes, for me, wasps are very definitely wonderful things.
Yes, and I'll be gaining an insight into one of our most glorious mammals, the grey seal.
Here in Wales, I'll be looking at one of our rarest reptiles, the sand lizard.
And I'll be here in the Trossachs, sadly, my final night on Springwatch 2020 with officially my favourite bird of prey, the osprey.
All that and so much more at 8 o'clock on BBC Two tomorrow night. If you can't wait until then, you can watch those live cameras 24/7 on the BBC iPlayer and the BBC Springwatch website. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Hannah Stitfall's on social media. Megs and I are out to lunch at 12. Hannah's back at 5, so try and catch up with us there. And we'd love to see anything that you're capturing on your cameras. Send it to us at BBC Springwatch, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. But until tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, good night and goodbye.
The Open University is inviting you to take part in its brand new citizen science project, OU Pollinator Watch, created to help us discover more about insect pollinators. To find out how to identify a selection of insect pollinators and share your very own observations or photos, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.